Alrighty. So again, thanks for coming to Careers in Biotechnology. As our first question and our way to start off, I'm going to ask that our panelists introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about who they are, what they do, and the nature of the organization or role that they have within that organization. And I'm going to let Adam start it off since I see he's unmuted.
That was actually an accident, but no worries. Good evening. My name is Adam Hussein. I am a graduate of the biochemistry program, University of Maryland, 2012. I have a PharmD from Howard University, and I currently work in a pharmaceutical company and a regulatory affairs postdoctoral fellowship. So I'll be completing a 2-year postgraduate training program where I can develop myself as a regulatory professional in the hopes of being retained by the company and becoming some kind of leader in regulatory affairs.
Great, thank you. Shruti, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Shruti. I graduated in 2017 with a neurophys major, and then graduated from Georgetown University with a master's in bioinformatics. And now I am a bioinformatics programmer at the Emmes Corporation, which is a contract research organization, which basically does contracting work for the government as well as private pharmaceutical companies.
Great, thanks. And finally, John.
Hey everybody, my name is John Linehan. I'm with a company called Avalere Health. We're based in Washington, D.C. We are a data-driven advisory services company. We work across exclusively focused on healthcare, but working across the entire healthcare sector, including biotechnology companies, health plans, provider organizations, pharmacies, health technology companies, and other intervention companies providing services to health plans or providers or patients. We generally support our clients on a number of activities all around understanding what is going on in a very complex and dynamic healthcare system and supporting them using data as much as possible in being successful in whatever their endeavors are. And that certainly can range. In biotechnology, it's getting products to market, and once they're on market, continuing to be successful throughout the entire life cycle. For health plans, it's a matter of attracting and retaining members and treating them in ways that maximize health outcomes and save costs. For providers, it's navigating evolving payment and delivery reform. For advocacy groups, it's profiling patient affordability or lack thereof at times to support advocacy efforts. It's a real broad array of work. I personally lead our data analytics function at the company, so we're really focused on utilizing data to answer a variety of those questions, and I'm happy to talk more about that. I'm from the area. I grew up in Silver Spring. Did not go to undergrad at Maryland, but did take post-bac courses there as I was pursuing a potential career in medicine, but ultimately I ended up in public health and business with a couple degrees at Hopkins and have been working in the area ever since.
Thank you and welcome to our panelists. I did forget to mention that I have some questions prepared, and so we will start out with those. But for those participating and watching, as you have questions, again, please feel free to put those in the chat. I'm going to go through my questions for a while, and then maybe about halfway through, we will start to pull from your questions as well. So please feel free to put those in as you have them. Otherwise, you just get to answer all my questions. So let's start off with the next one. What advice do you have for a student that's seeking to gain experience in your field? It might be specific hiring strategies that you think are helpful, or it could be specific skills you think they need to work on or make sure that they have. And I'll let John go first this time. Sure,
yeah, happy to. I think as you're looking to get into biotechnology in whatever capacity, I mean, my advice is always, keep an open mind and be willing to be as broad as possible. You do not need to set your career track based on your first role. It might take a few different positions until you find something that's the appropriate fit. but any role or position that you have at whatever company is going to be valuable experience that you're going to be able to work on your behalf. And so I would keep an open mind. Healthcare is a broad space. I think it's very helpful to have a broadest perspective as possible to understand the interconnecting pieces, whether it's deeply science driven, whether it's policy driven, whether it's analytics driven. But as I'm looking to hire, even running a data analytics team, I'm not just looking for data analysts. I'm looking for project managers and research experts. And at a consulting firm, you're looking for good, client management skills and customer service skills. And one can start really focusing in any of those areas and be able to branch out and learn new skills or evolve as you go.
Thanks. Adam, do you want to take that next?
Sure. I kind of feel like John hit it on the head. Something I've always noticed, especially working in like a corporate environment with other people, is that a lot of times I think people will count themselves out when they're applying for programs or positions because they feel like they might not have the proper skill set or the right education, the right background. But like John said, there's always plenty of positions if one's willing to be open. I would say project managerial skills are probably more highly valued than some of the actual technical skills when it comes to certain aspects of the job. So like when I came into my position, a lot of the stuff I had to learn for the job was on the go, but the skills I took from undergrad and pharmacy school, like time management, working well with others, meeting deadlines, how to meet a deliverable, those skills really put me in a good position. So my advice would be to develop not only your hard skills, but your soft skills as well. How to develop your emotional intelligence, how to work well with others, even in a virtual environment, So yeah, that's what I got.
Anything to add, Shruti?
Yeah, so for me, at least for my specific position, which is a bioinformatics programmer, to describe what that entails exactly, we're essentially looking at next generation sequencing data, as well as sometimes metabolomics, lipidomics, essentially big data that's coming from biological data sets and trying to analyze that. So sometimes this can be up to 2 TBs worth of data for 10 to 20 patients. So a large part is the technical aspect when it comes to bioinformatics. You do need to know how to, at least one programming language, and you do need a little bit of experience or background knowledge in next generation sequencing and mass spectrometry. And of course, all of the project management skills are very important. You're working with clients every day and subject matter experts, and you're having conversations of how the study should move, at least in my position. So I definitely think the hard skills are important. The soft skills are also important, but also just, when you're in undergrad and you're looking for a job, I think also just being active on LinkedIn and sharing relevant research for whatever position you would like to go into, specifically if that's within the research realm, sharing things that you find interesting kind of shows employers that you are going out of your way to go the extra mile, look up what is happening in your field. And that honestly ends up being a great way to get in front of employers, because most of them do look at your LinkedIn.
Great. So how would you say this field has been affected by COVID-19? What's some advice that you would have for students that are maybe seeking internships or jobs in biotechnology right now?
I'm happy to weigh in on this. We have an interesting point of view, given that biotechnology companies are our clients, right? And so we talk to those organizations, and we also understand the volume of our own business as a kind of a meter of how our clients are continuing to focus. I mean, I think there's a lot of dimensions to how COVID has impacted the business of healthcare and biotech. I think if anything, we are well past kind of the shock and surprise that we saw last spring. And, I have been enthused actually at the degree to which, biotech companies and organizations supporting them have been increasingly focused, throughout what has been a year full of distractions. Certainly in the areas of research and development around vaccines and other therapeutics, we've seen tremendous and very rapid innovation as a result of COVID-19 in a very positive way. And so, and I've seen the growing number of amount of research and strategy work around that. There's the element of trying to understand what the impact has been, or frankly, trying to develop drugs or therapeutics or interventions to support patients. But at the same time, there's a lot of activity that all stakeholders are looking to understand around what's the long-term impact of this in terms of healthcare and access to healthcare, and what's been the impact of stay-at-home orders and lockdown in having patients go and receive preventative care or diagnostic care, and what's the impact of delaying that type of diagnostics in the future life and in the future life cycle of illnesses that individual might have. And there's a lot of research that we've been doing going into quantifying that and then modeling out into the future what the impact is, so that healthcare stakeholders like biotechnology companies can intervene in appropriate ways. And certainly the healthcare disparities has also been a topic that's been really highlighted in terms of access to good care, access to vaccination at this point. And it's become, I think, an increasingly significant focus in healthcare, regardless of who you are, that I think will endure in a meaningful way. So, there have been some negative impacts, but a lot of positives insofar as we're seeing some very rapid innovation, and we're seeing some examples about how biotechs and other organizations can mobilize very quickly. Not to say this should have happened, but I've been very impressed with the way that manufacturers and other stakeholders have responded in the face of a lot of distraction and anxiety.
Yeah, and to add on to that a little bit too, at least in bioinformatics, there's been a lot of interest and boom in that field, just because now that we are kind of leaning towards mRNA vaccines, as you know, the Moderna vaccine, I believe also the Pfizer vaccine is mRNA based. So the more that we have vaccines that use transcriptome type of technologies, the more the field grows. For example, my company did actually work on the Moderna vaccine, and I can tell you it was incredibly hectic, and a lot of people working a lot of long hours, which is not typical, but given the severity of the pandemic, definitely warranted. And yeah, I would say that, it's been a hectic year, but a really productive year.
I think they hit the nail on the head. As someone who works for a pharma company, we have obviously clinical trials, and a lot of our disease states that they focus on involve patients with rare and debilitating diseases. So as John mentioned, we already had the issue of healthcare disparity, especially in those who might not have the same economic access. And now we have the situation where clinical trials had to be basically either put on hold or be done online. And because some of the disease states that we treat are so time sensitive, so pressing, that you don't really have an option to do that. So I will say that some companies, I think most pharma companies that I'm aware of, did a very good job of transitioning to remote clinical trials or remote patient follow-up in order to not halt the clinical trial development. So yeah, if I could say anything about looking for a job, I would say that what I've noticed personally since May is that when you eliminate some of the difference in access, for example, somebody wants an internship in Boston but can't afford to move out there from the West Coast. Well, now everything's virtual. So I've met people from all over the country doing a virtual internship from their own bedroom. So things are different now, and take advantage of any opportunity you can see, because now that there's a lot more flexibility with some things, you could open yourself up to an opportunity you wouldn't have had before.
That's a really great point. Thanks, Adam. I think everyone agreed COVID-19 is a current trend that everyone is facing, all industries. But what are maybe some other current trends specifically that you're seeing in biotech that students should be aware of?
I mean, if I could continue, so what Shruti mentioned, like the RNA vaccine, RNA technology is like, it's already been the cornerstone of a lot of the biotech pharmaceutical companies in Boston. So there's plenty of pharmaceutical companies out here. Just some of the bigger ones are Vertex, Alnylam, GSK. They have been approaching RNA technology for a while. Some of them have gotten approvals in different regards for different disease states, in different kind of drug delivery mechanisms. So it's not just a vaccination, like the Moderna vaccine. There's also the use of RNA to help deliver medication, the use of like nanoparticles. So things are shifting very heavily towards RNA kind of focus. So with the public perception also changing because of the COVID vaccine, I would think that we could see that continuing to be like the mainstay of the next generation of drug development.
Yeah, definitely to add on to that, you know, between typically with vaccines, which is the division that I work in, you will see live attenuated viruses or adenoviruses as a vector, and you more and more we're starting to see companies gear towards RNA, some DNA, depending on the mechanism of essentially providing it to the patient. So sometimes it requires electroporation and things like that, but there is a lot of research going into how best to create these vectors, how to put them in there. So there's that portion. And then there's also the portion of, well, which sequences or which proteins do we want to add to these vectors and transfect cells with? So there's definitely that. And then there's also, at least in bioinformatics, a lot of different technologies that are, being kind of built upon. So for example, I would say ChIP-seq, which is essentially you evaluate proteins that are bound to the RNA and you sequence those, or O-link, which is a similar kind of feature where you can evaluate protein changes after giving a drug, as well as look at the transcriptome changes almost in sequence. And so a lot of the major things that I would look at in undergrad would be, how do these processes work? How do you, how does a mass spectrometer work, and how do you know that that peak represents a protein, and how does next generation sequencing work? So knowing those core technologies is very important for data analytics in general, but will really take you far on interviews and things like that, really having a solid foundation.
And I would just add, I think that Adam and Shruti did a really nice job really deep digging into the trends from a science perspective and technology perspective. And from my angle, I think strategically speaking, there's, key trends right now are around affordability. So all of the sophistication and development we've seen in vaccines, as well as in cell and gene therapies that we've seen over the past several years, in which a patient with a very rare condition that has been having trouble finding the appropriate treatment could take it's hard to even say drug at this point, because it's kind of a drug combined with a certain procedure, to really change the underlying kind of genetic structure of a virus or a various illness. There's the question of moving from a chronic condition to one where you get treated one time and you might have an enduring benefit of that product. The science is incredible, and so is the cost. These treatments then become multi-million-dollar treatments, and there's a question of manufacturers have done all of this work to develop this technology and bring it to market, but now they need to convince payers to actually fund this, whether those are private payers like we have in a lot of cases in the US, or government payers in the US in the Medicare and Medicaid program. There's a huge debate right now around affordability and pricing of drugs. And there's a lot of investment that manufacturers are making right now in really being able to market these products and get reimbursement on behalf of patients. And that's data driven as well. There's a lot of health economics modeling that's happening using real world data, especially after the drugs hit the market or before they've hit the market, kind of estimating the potential impact that shows the value for money effectively of paying for these from the perspective of healthcare payers. And there's also a very significant kind of policy element to affordability. The last several administrations have focused on this topic in somewhat different, but also interestingly enough, some in many similar ways. There's a lot of discussion around how health economics evidence will be considered more strongly going forward in making decisions about what drugs to cover and what drugs not to, and how much a patient needs to pay versus an insurance company. And that's becoming as crucial as the science in actually bringing these products to market. And there's a lot of focus there right now to wrap around the work being done on the R&D side.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask another one of my questions before we start kind of getting into some student questions that I'm seeing come through. What do you think are, a couple of things that you might have done to set yourself apart from others when you were either applying to graduate school or applying to different positions? What are some things that you think maybe helped you get into those programs or into certain organizations, things that you think help set you apart?
Well, I'm happy to keep going. I mean, for me, having some real world background in the field that I was looking to get into, and even if it was not directly related, tangential, to kind of tell that story about how you became interested. Like I mentioned, when I was at Maryland in College Park doing, taking organic chemistry and physics, it was with this focus of applying to med school. But I actually never got to the point where I applied to med school, because in the intervening time, I became a special ed teacher. And, I was focused in the mental health space here in the area. And that got me thinking more broadly about public health as opposed to medicine. And so, I found this MPH MBA program at Hopkins that allowed me to build that public health background, but also think about the business of this, and, applied under this idea that, I appreciated the concept of public health more by virtue of being almost a healthcare provider in a sense for kids. And that really, I think, I don't know if, who knows exactly what gets you into the programs, right? But for me, that's a perspective that I was able to bring because I had some real world experience in an area that I never actually, frankly, thought I would do and kind of fell into and really enjoyed. And I think that's been a great stepping stone, for a lot of reasons. I mean, one, I think, is just defining my interest in public health, which then got me interested in, frankly, the consulting work that I'm doing now. But, I talked about really building on your experiences over time. You might think that that teaching special ed has nothing to do with, helping biotechs bring drugs to market, but it actually does, because of the amount of patience that it takes to, be in a classroom teaching, kids with various mental health disorders. You would be surprised about that, how I can leverage that patience in being in more of an office setting and dealing with tight deadlines and dealing with a variety of clients whose asks seem to be crazy, but you fall on those experiences and kind of bank them regardless of what they are.
Yeah, going off of what John was saying, creating that story for yourself, even though not every internship or job that you have may not seem useful, think about all of the things that you learned from each one, because more than likely there's a story there that you can kind of create that shows who you are as a student, who you are as a person, and all of those things kind of together is what people are looking to hire, right? When you're at work, you're also still a person. You don't change personality. So, everything that you're doing, there is a story in that about yourself, and just, make sure to highlight all of the parts that you would want an employer to see. And then additionally, in terms of more of the technical stuff, certifications from courses, there are tons of courses online that are free from Harvard, edX, Coursera. Some of them are paid, but getting those certifications and things, especially if you don't have the exact bachelor's that they're looking for, just being able to prove that you've touched some of this data before, you have at least tried to work with it, especially when you go into, like, for example, when I applied for my master's at Georgetown in bioinformatics, I did a little bit of medical coding, a little bit of programming, and just being able to say that you have that sort of background or at least interest is important, I think. And yeah, just for in terms of getting a job too, it would be knowing the background of your field, especially in the interviews. Usually there is a technical portion, so just knowing the foundational concepts, I think, are incredibly important.
I don't like going last after those two because they're so verbose in everything they say. But yeah, no, I think everything they said was great. And Shruti's response is similar to what I want to talk about. Like, being intentional with what you do and what your experiences are very helpful. Every mentor I've ever had has told me when reviewing like my CV or my resume, after every line, so what? So they want me to think about, like, what do I want to represent myself as? What do these experiences say about me? And what can I bring to the table? So personally, for me, what I think helped get me into pharmacy school, besides like the general test scores, I didn't have the best grades in my biochemistry program. Biochemistry was very difficult and it was not needed specifically for pharmacy school. So my GPA was not good. Let's just say it's not good, but I had a really stellar PCAT score. So I think that made a difference for me personally. I also had real life pharmacy experience. Like John mentioned, like the real world experience is sometimes something you can't really, compare to, because I got to see firsthand how patients interacted in a pharmacy. I got to work as a pharmacy technician and as a pharmacy intern, and was able to develop my experience in that regard. So a lot of pharmacy school candidates will end up working in retail after graduation. That's not what I ended up doing. So while in pharmacy school, I was open to every opportunity and I applied for everything that I was interested in. And when I applied for jobs, I put together my story in such a way that I could show the progression during my elevator pitch of, here's what I wanted to do and here's how I got there. So just for an example, a great experience on my CV that I was lucky to get, I got to do a research internship in South Korea. The picture behind me is a picture I took actually in South Korea. So obviously I miss it. And whenever someone sees it on my CV, they always ask about it because it's such an interesting, like, uncommon experience. And I talk about like why I want to do it and what I got from it, and what can help me shape my perception of where I want to go in pharmacy. That's why I wanted to be in drug development, but I knew I didn't want to be on the wet lab side. I wanted to be on the regulatory affairs side. So it's really all about how you want to present yourself.
Great, thank you. All right, so I'm going to go to one of our attendee questions. Someone said, seeing as you all either went to school in the area or were raised in the area, what would you say, or would you say that you find the DC, Maryland area is located well for biotech jobs? Where do you usually see these jobs outside of remote opportunities? And then do you know anything about potentially broad opportunities as well?
Sure. Yeah, this is a good question. I mean, I think the DC, Maryland area is potentially great for these jobs. It really depends on what you want to do. But if you really are interested, in R&D, preclinical, regulatory type work, there's a lot of organizations who have their kind of full facilities based here where you can focus on that. I mean, United Therapeutics in downtown Silver Spring is a smaller but growing one. Then of course you have AstraZeneca, which is one of the largest in the world, out in Gaithersburg. Novavax is out in Gaithersburg or Germantown as well. Otsuka is out in Montgomery County. So there's a lot of organizations where you can be particularly focused on R&D. If you're interested in strategy or health policy related or regulatory related jobs, almost all of biotechs have offices in this area, just in some size, given that FDA is in White Oak and that policymakers are downtown. So I think it's I personally have found it to be a great opportunity, and also there's a decent number of consulting firms like ours who are based down here. If you're not in this area and you want to be in biotech, the places to be typically are New Jersey, northern New Jersey, outside of New York. Boston and Cambridge obviously are huge. Chicago has a small but niche market of manufacturers, and then the West Coast, both Northern California, Southern California, as well as the Seattle area has a number of companies as well. Those tend to be the hotspots. And then abroad, my observation is if you work for a truly global pharmaceutical company, many people I've worked with tend to be there for much of their careers. And these companies oftentimes support their employees jumping around to different opportunities, both in the US and abroad, and support that financially and kind of build that into career tracks. And then if you're interested in consulting, certainly you need to get familiar with local markets, but it truly is an international profession, and there are opportunities, inside and outside the U.S. is what I've observed working with my clients.
Yeah, no, that was great. John said everything I was going to say, like literally. So, yeah, I don't have anything else to add to that, honestly. So I'm gonna go ahead and give it to Shruti.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, spot on with all of the hubs. Yeah, Boston's a big one for bioinformatics, New York and San Francisco, just because it's a tech hub, and Google and IBM and some of those tech hubs are also looking at health data. So I would say San Francisco is becoming bigger if you want to do something that's not directly pharmaceutical related, but still in the health field.
Great. Okay, so now we actually have one of our attendees, Mary, that wants to ask her question. So go ahead, Mary.
I think you're on mute, Mary.
Thank you. I'm finishing up my PhD this semester, so I'm looking to get a job that's like doctorate level, and I'm more computational biophysics, was working at the NCI. But I was wondering, like, where's the main ports where I should go to look for available jobs? Like, are there certain databases or websites where you would say it's best, or contact companies directly, or is it primarily just through networking?
I can kind of take that. So it sounds like you're a little bit kind of bioinformatics, computational biology is somewhat similar. Yeah, so I looked on LinkedIn and essentially looked at a bunch of different computational biology positions. And honestly, for some of them, I sent messages that was like, hi, this is my background. And you're getting your PhD, so you have plenty of research experience. So sometimes, at least while I was at Georgetown and I hadn't graduated yet, I would ask if they had any internship opportunities or mentorship opportunities. That's me personally, just to get my foot in the door, and also for my name to be in their inbox somewhere. But yeah, I would say LinkedIn was a big one for me. And then also whatever graduate program you're in, like University of Maryland, I'm sure also has that career center. Georgetown had a career center, and sometimes they advertise specifically to your school, depending on the company. So I would also check those out.
Yeah, if I could add on to that, I would definitely utilize my alumni network. Anyone you know who might be like a little bit above you, who you met during your time in University of Maryland, or seeing if they know somebody. Something that I personally very much underestimated when I was in college was the value of networking, and again, being intentional in how you network and what you do, as I mentioned previously, because you never know what door might end up opening. So the best thing I would recommend is, like Shruti said, like look at the university website, look at the alumni database, see if anything interests you, but also see if you can reach out to somebody on LinkedIn. And another thing that I wish I had done more in college, you probably don't want to do this yourself as a graduate student, is the value of, shadowing. Because I was always looking for something paid. I never wanted anything less than that. And sometimes I wonder like how my, career path would have shifted a bit if I had been able to, take advantage of some of the unpaid or shadowing opportunities. So yeah, like Shruti said, career fairs, networking, all those good things.
Nothing else to add. I think those are great answers.
Thank you.
Alrighty, another question here. Do most jobs in biotech require more than a bachelor's degree? If so, do you advise working for a while, such as maybe a research position before going on to further schooling, or is it better to go straight through with schooling?
So I'm happy to pick this one up. I mean, I spend now, like, my team is about 30 people. We're constantly growing. So a tremendous amount of my time is focused on recruiting. And so this is a great question. I would say that to the first part of this, eventually, yes, more than a bachelor's degree, I think would be very valuable in career trajectory, being able to advance as quickly as possible. But it is an advanced degree is absolutely not required to start in this field. We hire in our field a lot of individuals who are just coming out of undergrad who have interest in healthcare and show enthusiasm and excitement and a capacity to take on the type of work we're asking for, and that might be research oriented or project management oriented, a lot of on-the-job training. And we have a lot of individuals who are with us for a few years and then might go on, to learn more about a certain field, and then we'll go on to grad school. One of the benefits of that approach is that if you go to the right employer, they can also help pay for grad school and sponsor, your work. Or you can do it, whether you're doing it full time or you're doing it in the evenings or as part of executive programs. So I certainly don't think it's not a requirement to get started. And the second question of get some real world experience first, then apply to grad school or go straight to grad school. Like I mentioned that in my opinion, the real world experience is bankable regardless of what you're doing. And, it worked for me, but I've seen successes the other way around as well. So I don't think that there's a magic bullet. I think either way you go, you just, like Shruti said, have that story ready of why you made that decision, why it worked for you.
Righty.
Yeah, I don't
Oh,
think
sorry,
that's-
did you have something to add?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, sorry, Rachel, could I add something really quick?
Yeah, go ahead, please do.
Yeah, so again, like John had a great answer. I also wanted to say, this might not be as biotech related, but if you're like unsure about what you want to do and like you just know that you should be continuing with grad school, don't just do something because you feel like you have to. Like maybe getting some experience would be a good idea. Maybe taking a gap year and really trying to figure out what you want to do with your next steps is a good idea. There's nothing wrong with that. I think there's a kind of a stigma about people who like maybe take some time off between degrees and they want to just finish the whole thing out. Like I finished in 8 years, which is, typical, 4 years of undergrad and 4 years pharmacy school. But I knew people, and I know people I work with now who didn't do that. They changed career paths. They explored themselves after their bachelor's degree and really got to focus on what they wanted. So yeah, I mean, nothing is a silver bullet, like John said. Nothing's going to be the exact thing you're looking for. Just do what you can for yourself to really, boost yourself up.
Okay, and Shruti, you might have seen there's a question in the chat for you from a senior information science major. Bioinformatics is a vast field. They feel they really resonate with your career in bioinformatics. However, they feel they don't feel like they have much relevant experience when applying to biotech jobs. You've mentioned looking into fundamental concepts and using personal time to get certificates. How would you recommend researching those? And do you have companies you would recommend looking into?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of like to work backwards when I think about my career path. So it's like, what is the end goal here? And so then going from that, looking at the job descriptions of maybe a mid-level or a senior level job that you would want to get, and then start looking at the skills that's required for that position. So for example, with bioinformatics, a lot of companies require that you have some experience with R. So if you don't have any experience with R, then start learning those concepts. Sometimes you can even just do it on YouTube. Ultimately, I would say working backwards really helps, and also specifically with bioinformatics, you do need some programming. You need to prove that you can program. So there will be technical interview questions. And if you have any small projects that you can code, even if it's not through school and you do it yourself, or you almost recreate something that's already been done in a different fashion, those are all things that you can speak about. So I really do like, and I still currently do this, where I work backwards. So I look at the position that I want to be at and look at the skills that the people in those positions have and see what you can do to obtain those skills. So certificates are a great way if you're looking into technical. Dale Carnegie books is a great way if you're looking into leadership. So it's really, you have to figure out what specific skills that you want to have, and then figure out a way to connect that to what you want to learn and connect that to an interview.
Great, thanks. As a reminder, if anybody has questions, you can put those in the chat, or let me know if you prefer to ask it yourself. That's fine too. I'm going to go back to my list in the meantime. What is the biggest risk you've taken in your career? I know it's a tough question.
I can kind of start on that. So while I was in undergrad, I was looking into medical school at the time, but I wasn't 100% sure. So I ended up applying to a bunch of random internships, one of which I got was in health policy. And then I was also a scribe. And I was working at a business office at one point, doing accounts receivable. So there's something that I don't necessarily regret, but I like it and I dislike it, is that I do like that I got my feet wet in a lot of different areas. So it kind of let me explore the field, and sometimes it's nice to go into something and just be like, nope, the process of elimination is helpful as well. But I do think that it is risky in terms of the fact that people are looking at your experience and people do want to see some sort of consistency. But I will say that you learn skills either way on the job, but I do think it can be risky if you're spending time doing things outside of your major to a degree, because you don't have that consistency in your resume. But then again, the story part really kind of comes into, that's when you would really tell your story in an interview of, I tried this and I tried this and I learned these concepts from these positions.
Yeah, I guess I can think of something. So with pharmacy school, in your last year, you do rotation. So like mini internships, so like 5 weeks in different fields of pharmacy. Like retail or policy or pharma, depending on how things work out. So I didn't get selected for a pharma one, and I really wanted one. So I worked with my network, and I found someone I knew on the West Coast, like John mentioned, at Genentech. And long story short, I was working on setting up a rotation in the middle of my 4th year, when rotations have already been set for like 6 months. So the risk I took was I put all my eggs in one basket and worked to get that one internship ready. If it did not work out, I would not be able to graduate on time because of the way I arranged my my rotations. So I was very fortunate that it worked out in that way, but I would not recommend taking a risk like that if you didn't have a backup plan. So I got to go to Genentech. I got some good experience there, and that worked really well to my story when I interviewed for my position now. And something funny about that story is that when COVID hit, my final rotation got canceled. So if I didn't have that experience at Genentech, I wouldn't have graduated on time regardless. So it's funny how that thing, things work out differently.
And I'm happy to just briefly, I mean, biggest risks, like, I mean, you will run across scenarios in your career, especially if you're with an employer for, a long period of time. Employers start to think about, okay, I've got someone who's committed to the organization, they do a good job. How do I, continue to challenge them, and how do I kind of make the most use out of what they're capable of? And they'll, give you an opportunity to take on some new responsibility or new role, or, move up or laterally to something that you've never done before, even if you're in the same organization. I mean, this happens, and I've been in that situation in the past. I mentioned I lead data analytics team at my company. But I've been at the company for 8 years, and the first 5.5 years or so, I was actually more oriented toward, business development. So, sales oriented conversations about helping to sell the skill set that we have and talking to the clients that I talked about. But, I'm a, health economist by training. I have an analytic background, and, was doing a good enough job in that role that I had the opportunity to step into, leading an execution team, focused on analytics. And, there's a lot of people on this team that know a tremendous amount more than me when it comes to very sophisticated data science. And in some cases that's intimidating. And you want to make sure you build credibility amongst your team, but I took that because it sounded like, I thought we had an opportunity to grow as a business in that area. And I certainly knew my way around the subject matter, even if I wasn't in the data on a day-to-day basis. And that was a couple years ago at this point, and it's turned out really well, and I love what I do, and I love the opportunity. But it was intimidating at first, especially when you get comfortable in one specific area. You need to get used to working with very smart people, and be playing catch up a little bit, and learning about where the team is focused and how they work, and kind of making a name for yourself and a place for yourself in a new team. But in the end, I think that was, like most things, every little thing's bankable and incredibly meaningful and valuable in my career, and I'll be able to use this to whatever I do next, whenever that is.
Great. We have someone that wants to know if there is a technical interview for knowing biology and chemistry required for bioinformatics, or if it would be helpful to take the GRE or the MCAT.
So I guess that depends on what the end goal is. So if the end goal is graduate school, then yes, you would need to take the GRE. But again, that's program specific. Some places will accept an MCAT as well in place of a GRE, but usually you will see a GRE. And in terms of applying for a position, I have yet to sit through an interview where there hasn't been a technical portion. And that is just my experience.
Okay. What are some habits that you think have served you well in your careers?
For me, I guess patience. I mentioned that previously. It's likely, you'll move in, whoever you are listening, you'll move into a place that is very fast paced and very hectic. And, maybe a place where there's a lot of individuals, trying to kind of compete for face time, or just do a really good job. And, I hope for everybody that you go to a place with great politics and, a great spirit of camaraderie and teamwork. But, the work will get hectic and busy at times. It's inevitable. And I think patience has, for me, been tremendously valuable. As I become a leader over the years, I think humility has been crucial, right? In order to kind of get individuals to see things your way and to get people kind of, moving to the beat of the same drummer, so to speak. I think those have been crucial just in terms of traits and being able to work, externally with, in a variety of situations and a variety of individuals. And then, I think a personal commitment to just, regardless of what you're asked to do, whether you think it's super fun or whether you think it's super boring and monotonous, do a really, really good job at it and put in the time to do that, because people notice it. And eventually you'll get opportunities to do different things. And others will do the things that might have been really boring or really monotonous. And, put yourself in a place where, you have the ability to take on those new things. And if so, great, you can be somewhere for a long time. And if not, you're in business for yourself, and find a place where you can take on that responsibility with the benefit of your experience, having done those things that, maybe aren't as fun. So, regardless of what you're asked to do it really well. And my experience is that people notice.
Alrighty, I'm gonna slightly reword this question, but hopefully it still gets at the same question that she's asking. But would you have any recommendations for types of positions in biotech or in pharma companies for someone who maybe gets a degree in biological sciences and then does 2 years of research at NIH? What types of positions do you think that type of person would be competitive for after those 2 years at NIH?
It's been a long time since I've been in that position. So, but, I don't have a perfect answer to that question, but I would say that if you've got that experience in research at NIH, there are tremendous connections between researchers at NIH into biotech. And just going back to Adam's advice, leverage those, relationships and contacts that you made to the absolute extent possible. Ask for advice. When you are sitting down getting advice from somebody, always ask the question of, who do you recommend that I speak to next? And get that next, and would you mind introducing me? And get that introduction and kind of work your way through, your NIH background, frankly, to talk to individuals at pharma companies. It might just be to network and learn a little bit more about what they do, but through that experience, through those discussions, you'll probably learn about internships, open roles, or get more insight into this question.
Yeah, I ditto for all of that. And then I think from my understanding, I'm not sure if ORISE is FDA or NIH, but NIH definitely has a similar thing where within the ORISE program, they do have presentations from various different labs as well as pharma companies at times. And so I do know, at least within the ORISE program, that they really do try and place you after. So they have a network of people that they will most likely recommend you for. So because ORISE, like the NIH, typically ends up being it's not a salaried position. It ends up being one of those positions where it's a 2-year contract and then it's over. And so from my understanding, they do try their best to make sure that they introduce you to people so that you have something stable beyond that point.
Yeah, sure. The ORISE is a great example. That's something some people in my class went on to do after graduation. I was just looking at my own company's website, for example. So they do have positions that are like open with someone with a life sciences degree, usually in a wet lab position. Just as an example. So like clinical research associate is something that can be on there. But again, a lot of these things, like John and Shruti both mentioned, are gonna have to involve some kind of like networking or leveraging, because honestly, you're probably gonna have 20 other candidates with the same qualifications, if not better, also applying to similar positions. So applying, cast your net wide. That's my advice for the biotech or pharma aspect. CROs are also an option, contract research organizations, and Shruti works for one. And there's a few that I can think of immediately in Maryland that like would probably be in the network to hire somebody with a life science and NIH background. So all of those things. The NIH is a great CV like booster and door opener. So take advantage of that.
And Charles River would be another really
Oh, yeah.
large contract research organization that does hire bachelors and masters and puts them in scientist positions. So.
Alrighty, this next question I have will be our last, just because we're approaching 6 o'clock and I will be mindful of our panelists' time. So someone asked, there's a lot of things that influence the direction of the company or organization. There might be a lot of ideas worth exploring and pursuing, but unlike academia, these will be superseded by the priority of profit and funding. At your job, do you feel you have agency in the purpose of your organization? Also, how satisfied are you with your work-life balance in this industry?
I'm happy to, I mean, just briefly on this topic. This is, the statement in the question is correct. Many biotech opportunities are at for-profit companies that have business objectives, and many of them are publicly traded and have even more business objectives that need to be met. I think personally speaking, I work at a company that's about 250 people. We are owned, we're a wholly owned subsidiary of a large publicly traded company that's about 1,500 or 2,000 people. But I do feel like I have agency in the purpose of the organization. And that's one reason why I stay here, and I've been here 8 years and I've had more and more of that responsibility as I've gotten more, as I've moved up within the organization. And now one of 3 people who run the business. But our objective is really to support all of our staff in having a voice in some form or fashion into what it is that we do and what they want to focus on. And we spend a lot of time trying to put them on paths that, help them kind of realize that. And if we do that successfully and they do it successfully, then the company does well. And so, I think that, not every organization you're going to feel like that, but the ones you are at, tend to retain employees like mine retain me. In work-life balance, it's super busy, especially in consulting. You're focused on a lot of engagements at the exact same time. But the definition of work-life balance, I think, really does depend on who it is. I personally feel like I have time. I have kids, a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old at this point. Like, those are really my number one responsibility, and I do what I can to, be a dad first, and my company supports that. Doesn't mean I need to work late into the evening or after they go to bed. A lot of the times, yes, but I like what I do, and it's worthwhile as long as it's not too much.
Yeah, I would agree with that work-life balance question. I think that the higher you move up in your field of interest, you are going to be working more than 40 hours a week just because there is a lot to do and you have more responsibilities. And so that's where picking your career path and picking, like being intentional about looking at the resumes of people that you look up to in some way, shape, or form is important, and working backwards can be important because there aren't too many people that I know that have 40-hour work weeks and it's a solid 40.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. Those are some great answers. I agree.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I want to thank our panelists for being here and for sharing their advice and their expertise. And thank you to those that provided such great questions for them to answer as well. And for those that kind of sat in and participated and watched today. Jeffrey just stuck the link to the kiosk. So if you didn't get a chance to sign in and let us know that you attended, please do that briefly. But otherwise, thank you so much and have a great night. Thank you again to our panelists.
Thank you. Happy to participate.